Welcome to Pretty Lies and Alibis. Let's seek the truth and travel the long road to justice together. What you know, Alibiers? Welcome to another episode of Pretty Lies and Alibis. I'm Gigi. Good to have you here this evening. It's Wednesday, all finished with day 14. Yeah, day 14 of the Chad Daybell trial. We're going to break down everything that happened after lunch. But first, if you're watching on YouTube, you know the drill. Don't forget to hit subscribe if you haven't already. Like the video, share it with your friends, and you can ring my bell if you want notifications of when I post new content. Click that little bell icon. A lot of people have asked if I came up with that from the song Ring My Bell, and the answer is yes. I think in lyrics, y'all, all day, every day. So it just popped in my head one day and never left. So there you go. Music fact of the day from my favorite movie of all time, Grease. Frankie Valli sang the theme song, Grease. He had the choice of either singing the song or appearing in the film. He chose to sing the theme song, and former teen idol Frankie Avalon accepted the opportunity to be Frenchie's guardian angel and sang Beauty School Dropout, a teenage ne'er-do-well. Love that movie. Never gets old. I watch it like once every 3 months. After lunch, Miss Alice Gilbert was still on direct with the prosecutor, Lindsay Blake. One of the last things that she was asked before lunch was if she was given any details on how Lori's daughter died, and she did not. After Tammy's death, Emma was sick, and so she would take her meals and clean her house just to help her out. She learned JJ and Tylee were missing in November of 2019. She found out Lori was their mother and also that Lori and Chad were now married. She called Chad and asked if these were Lori's kids, and he told her yes. He said it was a custody battle and everything would be fine. Emma was the one who told her that Chad and Lori had been married. At one point, Chad came over and showed Alice and her husband their wedding photos. She said he was very excited to show those. This visit was probably 2 weeks after Chad and Lori first visited them. She was surprised they got married because initially they said they didn't know when they would get married. He came another time after Lori was arrested in Hawaii and moved back to Idaho. He asked, first of all, if he could stay there. At first, it was just overnight, and she said she was okay for an overnight stay. She was not comfortable with him staying there for any length of time, so they told him their daughter was moving in. And when he came in, he was very upset and was crying, saying that he had to get Lori out of jail. It was killing her being in there. So he asked if they could put their house up for Lori's bond. They asked Chad if he had any family to ask, and he said no. They told him they would think about it, and this was on a Saturday. The very next day, he wanted to bring the bondswoman to their house to meet them. They decided they were not going to put their house up for Lori's bond. She did ask him how many daughters Lori had, and Chad said one. And then the witness said, "You told us her daughter died when we asked if she had kids," and she said Chad denied that he said that to her. And she says, "You did." When asked about the bond, she was kind of miffed that he asked that. So she asked, "Where are the children?" And she gets emotional on the stand. She asks, "Where's Tylee? Tylee's a teenager. Doesn't she want a life, a boyfriend?" Chad said Tylee didn't like people and she didn't like me. What the witness picked up on was him using the past tense when talking about Tylee. They go back in time a bit to February of 2019. Chad was at their place. The couple were working on a bedroom floor. And as Chad was leaving, he mentioned that he had a vision that Tammy would pass away. He didn't know how or when, but he said it would be before her 50th birthday. Chad also told the witness and her husband that Tammy liked playing computer games, and he told her that her deceased grandmother came to him and said she wasn't happy with Tammy on the computer and that she was wasting her time. The witness did say that when Chad made the comment about Tammy dying, Tammy didn't have any health issues, and the witness kind of just passed it off. On cross, Pryor asked how often she saw Tammy. She said they met on Wednesday mornings for an hour or two, and there were 4 of them that met, and then she would see her on Sundays. They would sit with the Daybells at the second meeting, sometimes at church, but not in the first meeting. Their church services lasted about 2 hours. He asked about where the Daybells sat in church, and she said in the middle until Emma gave birth to her child, and then they kind of move towards the back. Pryor asks if Chad would park his truck at church every morning, and the witness doesn't know. He talks about the funeral, and she knew that Tammy's family was from Springville, and she didn't think it was unusual that the funeral was held there. Back to when Chad came to their house October 26th of 2019, Chad said he met Lori in Utah back in 2018. And he asks if the witness knew Lori through Melanie Gibb, his favorite person to talk about. But she says yes. Pryor says that Gibb is deeply involved in the Preparing a People movement. There's an objection that's sustained. Pryor asks how she knows Gibb, and the witness doesn't remember how they came to know about Gibb's podcast, but they did listen to it. And that's where she heard of Lori Vallow, was through Melanie Gibb's podcast. Pryor brings up Disneyland and that trip around Thanksgiving and asks if it's possible. Chad said Knott's Berry Farm. The witness was adamant she heard Disneyland. Pryor really sticks his foot in it with these next couple of witnesses about the upstairs, which is the other day. Remember, he was trying to discredit the cousins, saying that there was only one level to the house. Pryor asked the witness if the house is one story. She said there's an addition and you walk through a breezeway and then there are stairs. Pryor asked if she's aware the addition doesn't have power. There's an objection, which is sustained. The prosecution said Pryor's just testifying. Pryor says, I'm asking. At this point, Judge Boyce seems very annoyed with Pryor, and he says there's a proper way to ask. She has been inside the addition, but she doesn't know what utilities are in there. Pryor asked if she's aware nobody uses that space. There's an objection that's sustained. He asked if she knew of any family who uses it, and she knew Garth had a ham radio and a drum set that she thought was in there. She said she doesn't know their living conditions, but she knew where Tammy's room was in that main house. Pryor goes on to ask her whose bedroom is whose, and she doesn't know as far as the kids go. They bring up at the time of Tammy's passing, Garth was living at home, and she didn't know if Seth was or not. Mark was coming home from his mission and probably would have lived there. The other daughter, Leah, lives in Utah. Pryor points out that the talk about going to Disneyland was in October, and he asked if Chad was trying to hide his whereabouts, and the witness says no. Pryor says that Chad openly discussed his plans for the future, and she said that he told her he was going to Hawaii to write a book. Pryor asked if she got the impression when talking to Chad about the kids, if she felt the kids were still alive when he talked about them. She said she felt he was avoiding the topic and she couldn't get a straight answer out of him. Pryor talks about when Chad told her when the truth comes out, and this is a custody case, you didn't get the feeling the truth would come out and the children's whereabouts would be told to everyone. She said that's what he said, but Pryor interrupts and says he has no further questions. On redirect, Lindsay Blake asks, do you know where Chad went every morning? She has no idea, but she knows he did go to the BYU college campus. Prosecutor says, you've been inside the home. Are there stairs in there? Of course, Pryor objects, and that's overruled. Lindsay Blake says, to be fair, there's more than one story to this house, and she says yes. Prosecutor says that Chad talked about future plans. The witness says going to Hawaii, but they did talk about marriage. He didn't know when or where it was going to happen. The prosecution says Chad referred to Lori's daughter as dead. There's an objection that's overruled. Chad mentioned Lori had a daughter who had just passed away. Then Prosecutor Blake says, are you aware Lori's children were found on Chad's property? The answer was yes. That was all for her. The next witness, Todd Gilbert, Miss Alice's husband. He had heard of Chad as an author in 2015 and had read most of Chad's books before he met Chad in person. They moved into the neighborhood with Chad and Tammy in March of 2017. And of course, they met the whole family. They were in the same ward as Chad and Tammy, and within a week of moving, they met. He said he knew Chad better. He'd see him once or twice a week, depending on the time of the year. Mainly it was at church, but he would see Chad outside, or sometimes Chad would ask him to come help with plumbing stuff. Chad did discuss some of his beliefs with the witness. He said they didn't ring true to him, but he has no reason to doubt that Chad had visions. Chad was in the process of finishing the second book series in 2019, and they would talk about some of the events in the book, which Chad says came from his visions, and some of those were also fictional. The witness said they'd talk about the events Chad had visions of. He said he didn't feel Chad was trying to teach him per se, but was just telling him about things that were going to happen. The things Chad talked about didn't always go with standard LDS doctrine, But the witness was willing to listen. He thought it was interesting, even though he did not hold the same beliefs as Chad. They talk about that February 2019 visit where Chad texted and said he wanted to come over and talk. They talked about a bunch of things. And this is when Chad was leaving. He said Tammy's life mission was going to end and she would die before she turned 50. Like his wife Alice, he learned of Tammy's passing the morning of October 19th. He says they got a call around 7 a.m. from Emma, who was crying. Chad took the phone and then told of her death. They went over to the house around 8:15 that morning, not too long after Tammy had been pronounced dead. He noticed when they walked in the living room, all the kids except Mark was there sitting on the couch, and Chad just did not seem sad like you would expect somebody to be when your spouse dies suddenly. He said it seemed very businesslike. He said Chad's demeanor was hard to figure out because he's very soft spoken anyway. That day he was talking to Chad, and the witness said, "Well, it looks like your vision must have happened." Chad turned his back to his kids and says the kids really didn't know about that. He had not told them about his vision of their mom dying. He goes through the midnight coughing spell, threw up, went back to bed. Chad told the witness he figured Tammy died around 2 a.m. from an embolism. And the witness says, I don't know how Chad knew that. Then around 5:30, she rolled out of bed onto the floor partially. That's when he yelled for Garth to come help get her back on the bed. The prosecutor says, so she dies at 2 a.m. and then 3 or 4 hours later, she rolls out of the bed. And the witness says, yes. The witness said they would see Tammy at Walmart, at church, out in the yard if they drove by, and she always looked fine. He never noticed anything about her health that would make him think it was failing in any way. He noticed Chad and Tammy's interactions when they first moved in the area. He was assigned to go to Chad's home through their ward. Chad would be on the couch holding hands with Tammy, and they would do the same at church. He said they sat closer to the front, but at the start of 2019, they were moving towards the back, and their demeanor, he said, was separate from each other. The day Tammy died, they asked Chad if the family would like breakfast, so they went to McDonald's. And when they got back, more people had shown up. Garth told them to leave the food on the kitchen table. The day after the funeral and the night of the Idaho memorial, they took dinner to the house around 6. That's when Chad told the witness he's got to move out. He said he can't stay here anymore and that he had a friend on Pioneer Road who had a townhome and wasn't there much, and he was going to move in with them. He kind of laughs and says, I didn't think it was a woman. So Tammy's funeral was October the 22nd in Utah, the memorial in Idaho the very next day on the 23rd. He said the timing of Tammy's funeral struck him as being hurried. He said it just seemed fast to have a funeral for your spouse who you're in love with. At the funeral, they went into the viewing area. Chad and the kids are in there, as well as both Chad and Tammy's relatives. Chad was there at the head of the casket. The witness felt like he was in a hurry to get all this over with. A week after Tammy's death, that Saturday, it would be good to bring Chad a pizza. So they called at 5:30 and offered to come to his new place, but Chad said he would come to them. He got there in 30 minutes around 6 o'clock. Chad sat at the table. He was chatting, and he seemed hesitant and said he wanted to tell them something, which is he has a girlfriend. The witness said they about fell in the floor. Chad seemed hesitant to say her name, but he did say Lori Vallow, and the witness thought the name was familiar, and then he realized he had heard her name on one of the Gibb podcasts. Chad told the witness Tammy's mission was over, and the second half of his life was to be with Lori, and she was to help him with his mission. He also added in Lori was beautiful. Chad said that Lori and her friends would be in the area and asked if they wanted to meet, and they said sure. The witness and his wife were working at the temple on Tuesdays, taking the night shift. Chad told him Lori and some friends would be in the temple and they would try to meet up. He meets Lori at the temple for the first time. Of course, she was with Chad. And then he talks about Chad and Lori coming to their house 2 or 3 days later after they first met. He said they were very happy and excited to be with each other, and they invited them inside. He said Chad and Lori were holding hands, and he saw Chad rubbing Lori's leg. He thought it was odd with Tammy dying just a week ago, and then you have Chad acting like this teenager in love. He never saw that kind of affection with Tammy. Chad and Lori told them they would eventually end up in Hawaii and live there permanently once they got things wrapped up in Rexburg. And eventually they would get married. He goes through the same thing his wife talked about, where Lori said her husband had died of a heart attack in December of 2018. When they asked about kids, she said several. Chad popped up. That's when he said she had a daughter that just died, and he notes Lori did not correct him. They never mentioned Lori having a minor son. After that visit, they came back about 2 weeks into November. to show wedding photos. He said it was quite a few. And off the top of my head, I think I remember hearing there were over 700 photos taken the day they got married. They also talked about how they were going with Chad's kids to Disneyland and Knott's Berry Farm. Of course, no mention of JJ or Tylee. Chad and Lori told them they had been married a week before they showed up to their house. The prosecution asked who was in the wedding photos. Was there a teenage girl? Was there a minor boy? Was Alex Cox, Melanie Gibb? No, just Chad and Lori. Chad also told the witness his kids were fine about Lori. He said Tammy had appeared to him 2 times in spirit since she passed, and she was fine. He was married to Lori, and she was okay with her kids accepting that. That was very odd to the witness. He talks about Chad coming back, asking for them to put their house up for Lori's bond after she was extradited to Idaho. He walked in and Chad said that Christ sent him there to ask if you'd be willing to put your home up to get Lori out of jail. They were like, no. He remembers hearing Chad say Lori's daughter didn't like him and would stay away from him. He's been inside the Daybell house and confirms there's a set of stairs that are in that back part of the home in that addition. On cross, the last question was about a part of the house that has stairs. Pryor talks about the 1-story part of the house being brick and the back is an attached building with stairs. He says it's almost like a garage. There's an objection. Prosecution says he's testifying. That was sustained. So Pryor asked the witness, how would he describe it? He said it was storage and mechanical downstairs, and then above that was a room. Then Pryor talks about they didn't really use it much, maybe Garth. Lots of objections being sustained. The witness says the whole family used it, and there was actually a bed upstairs. Pryor asked if there's a computer or any kind of office furniture, and he says no. The witness also doesn't think there was heat up there. He asks about Gibb. The witness listened to her podcast, and Pryor asks if she is part of Preparing a People. And he says, to his knowledge, not really. He talks about Preparing a People had a conference in Idaho in February of 2019, and Chad introduced the witness and his wife to Melanie Gibb. She spoke at that conference. Pryor asks if Chad made any comments about Tammy's health or impending death, and the witness did not remember those comments at the conferences, by the way. He and his wife attended 3 of those. Pryor asks about AVOW, which is a voice of warning. The witness says it's a preparation website. Pryor points out prepping isn't inconsistent with LDS faith, and there's nothing that says you cannot be a part of these prepper groups, and the witness agrees. Pryor says the writing of the fiction books doesn't preclude him from being a part of the LDS faith, and he's entitled to express his beliefs versus what someone else in the LDS faith believes, and the witness agrees. He moves on to meeting Lori at the temple, and Pryor asks if there's a limitation of who is allowed in. The witness says active members, and they have to have a temple recommend from the bishop. The bishop will ask you questions to see if you're living the gospel. Pryor asks who all was there. He remembers Melanie's, but does not know the other lady. I'm wondering maybe if this isn't when Zulema went up to visit, because he would know Melanie Gibb. Pryor asked if Lori told him Tylee didn't like Chad, and the witness says it seems that was more Chad's feelings. Pryor says that Chad is soft-spoken and shy, and the witness agrees. The witness thinks that this was about a week after they got married where they talked about taking this vacation. Pryor brings up Tammy's death again, and Chad just said it was an embolism, and when they found her in the morning, he had to call Garth, who helped pick her up off the floor and put her back in the bed. On redirect, Lindsay Blake asks, is Preparing a People attached to the LDS faith? That's a big no. Were some of the things Chad talked about beyond standard LDS teachings? Yes. For a temple recommend, if someone disclosed they were having an affair, would they qualify for a temple recommend? That's a no. She asks, you were told Tammy died around 2 a.m. and then rolled out of bed several hours later. The witness says yes. Lindsay Blake, no further questions. The next witness is Janice Olson. She is a 30-year veteran teacher. She teaches first grade currently and has worked her entire career at the school Tammy taught at. Shout out to Miss Olson. Not an easy job. She would see Tammy several times a day all over the school. They would eat lunch together 3 to 4 times a week. She said Tammy was just a good colleague and a good friend to her. She said Tammy was organized. She went above and beyond to get books into the hands of kids. Tammy would come gather books if it was that class's library day, and then the teachers would bring their classes to the library. Tammy also came to their high fitness Zumba class twice a week. Those classes went on for about an hour, and she was a regular attendee. Tammy followed along like everybody else in there. No struggles while in class. She didn't fall behind, and she never had to stop class early. She said Tammy was active and healthy. She was shocked when she heard about Tammy's death. A student's mother who worked with Tammy in the church called to let her know that morning that Tammy was dead. She had just seen Tammy the day before she was killed and interacted with her. Tammy didn't complain of any physical problems, and the witness didn't see anything concerning as far as her health went. Tammy had been at fitness class that week and never complained about anything. On cross, Pryor asked if the students were brought to Tammy for library time and she wouldn't have to walk all across the school. The witness says that's correct. Then Pryor says, as part of their library hour, the teacher would gather the students, walk them to the library, and then return an hour later to pick them up and take them back to class. He then asked if Tammy was really busy getting ready for a book fair that Friday, and the witness doesn't remember. On redirect, this witness's classroom is by the front door. And as far as where Tammy would be, it would be down the hall past the lunchroom. And the prosecution asked, is it possible Tammy would be walking around the school and you just didn't see? There's an objection that's sustained. They asked the witness if she saw Tammy walking, and she said frequently. She would walk to gather books before teachers took their classes to the library. And if she knew a teacher was teaching, for example, something about insects, Tammy would get all the books about insects that she could and take those to the teacher. The last witness of the day, Taylor Ballard. She is with Ballard Insurance Group. That's the health insurance, life insurance, and disability insurance that Tammy carried. Chad was also her client. October 31st, 2019, he came in because the health insurance the whole family had through Tammy's employment was expiring. He asked for an individual insurance plan for himself and 3 of their kids: Seth, Leah, and Mark. Idaho was looking to expand Medicaid to adults in January of 2020. Chad said his book business would be working at a loss without Tammy's income, so she asked for a copy of his taxes to verify that. Given the situation, she applied for Medicaid for January, but on November 5th, she went to the Department of Health and Welfare to apply for him, and the interface saw that his previous income was higher than what he told her. So he qualified for marketplace coverage. She texted him November 5th, the day he got married, and asked for his 2018 taxes. He said he wasn't in town that week, but he would be back that next week and would stop by. He came into her office November 21st. She found out he was making around $30,000 a year, which meant he would be eligible for different insurance. So they talked about what options he had, and that plan would start in January of 2020. He asked her in a very hypothetical way, how hard would it be to add a new wife if he got married? And she told Chad there's variables they would need to discuss. Then he said, I'll be honest with you, I'll probably be married by the end of the year, and I'm curious about what the process would look like. He called December 11th, 2019 to make sure he was squared up for January. He picked his plan and paid for it. Never mentioned JJ or Tylee ever. What's odd is she got 5 letters addressed to Chad. It was sent to her office. These were from the Department of Health and Welfare and also mail from the insurance company he had the plan with. That's never happened to her before. And all of their information had the address that Chad provided to them and not their address. On December 23rd, 2019, she was in the Department of Health and Welfare doing other business. That's when she learned Chad and Lori were married and Lori's kids, JJ and Tylee, were missing. At first, she didn't know if JJ and Tylee were 2 of the kids she helped Chad get insurance for. She got really confused and just did not know what to think. Then she started to question Tammy's death, and the timing of his remarriage seemed very fast. Her office also dealt with Tammy's life insurance, disability, and health insurance. So she looked at Tammy's life insurance and saw it had been paid out. She also found that in open enrollment at the beginning of the school year, Tammy had upped her life insurance policy to the maximum allowed. Fast forward, March 11th, 2020, Lori is in jail. Chad comes in her office asking how to get health insurance for Lori. The witness asked for Lori's name, and he wrote on a sticky note, Lori Ryan Daybell, and he told her they were married November the 5th. Chad told the witness Lori was in jail and was worried something might happen to her, The witness told Chad since she's incarcerated, Lori would be covered by the state should she get sick. Plus, with the marriage on November 5th, that was outside that 60-day enrollment window. Chad tells her Lori should be getting out next week. The witness said they could use that as a qualifying event if she did. As she was looking through Chad's information, just seeing what was different and what was the same, when she got to Chad's income, he told her they confiscated his computer and he wasn't able to pay himself yet. She asked who they were, and he said the FBI. Chad wanted to be sure that himself, Lori, and his son Mark would have coverage. And the application asks, is there anyone in your household who needs coverage? Of course, he never mentioned JJ or Tylee. She said at this point, JJ and Tylee are all over the news. So she started thinking the insurance payout was fraudulent. And she started to think Tammy's death may not have been an accident and the life insurance monies were paid out when it should not have been. She said to her, it seemed like they wouldn't need health insurance the way things were going. She told him she would reach out when the insurance premium rates were ready, and that would be the next day. So the next day, March 12th, she texted Chad, giving him the rates for a household of 3. She also wanted to make sure there was no one else in the house that they needed to count. Chad said, that's good. That's great. March 16th, Chad reaches out to her because the Department of Health and Welfare could not verify Lori's information. Chad gave their marriage certificate and Lori's driver's license. On March 18th, they talk again. She let him know the issue with Lori's identity or information was resolved. She last spoke to him on March 26th about another notice he got, and she let him know it was resolved. She told him to let her know if anything changes, like income. He told her it's going to be a tight year and he doesn't see anything changing. She did the open enrollment presentation for Tammy actually at the beginning of the school year. She explains in the presentation what life, health, and disability insurance looks like for that year. When Chad came into her office, she noticed on November 21st, his wedding finger, he had a turquoise ring on. She didn't know if it was Tammy's or potentially an engagement ring. But when he came in on March 11th, Chad was noticeably thinner and tanner, and on his wedding finger that had the turquoise ring, there was a black ring on it. She thought the turquoise must have been Tammy's, and this was his new one. On cross, Pryor points out that her interview with Officer Mattingly, she mentioned on October 31st when Chad approached her about the insurance, he only asked about Seth, Leah, Mark, and Chad. The witness says yes. For the school enrollment, she did that presentation August 23rd, and the forms were due to be turned in September 15th. If there were changes, they would have been retroactive to September 1st. Pryor asked if she's aware of the other life insurance policy Chad and Tammy had. There's an objection. So the rate for the life insurance is 5 times your salary. Tammy elected for $80,000 of life insurance, and I suck at math, y'all, but if my math is right, that woman made $16,000 a year working in a school while Chad's traveling around, giving kitchen talks at Lori Vallow's houses. Rest her soul. This is interesting, and I wonder if this is something that Chad told Pryor that is a lie, which probably has been a lot of things he's told Pryor. Pryor asked if there was ever any discussion that Lori's kids lived somewhere else in the country. She said Lori's kids never came up in any regard. Of course, Pryor had nothing further. There was no follow-up with the state. Not a good day for Chad Daybell in court. People have been very worried all day. Oh, the medical examiner couldn't determine a cause of death. He did, and it was asphyxiation, and it was a homicide. And all these neighbors' testimonies were perfectly placed by the prosecution to show the motive for the murder. And that's the very thing I think that will get Chad convicted, just like his beloved wife. We'll see what tomorrow brings. I think if Garth Daybell is going to testify, it's going to be soon. Don't forget, come chat with us over on YouTube. I'll be live about 9:30. Like to start about an hour before. Lots of interesting conversation. Hope to see you there. But in the meantime, have a good rest of your evening. We will see you tomorrow.